yang diperlukan hanya akaun e-dompet dengan identiti yang disahkan melalui penyedia perkhidmatan yang terpilih. Rangsangan digital secara one-off bagi setiap orang boleh ditebus dan digunakan untuk tempoh 2 bulan bermula 1 Januari 2020 dan akan tamat pada 29 Februari 2020. Kerajaan akan memperuntukkan sehingga 450 juta ringgit kepada khazanah nasional untuk melaksanakan insentif ini yang akan memberi manfaat kepada 15 juta rakyat Malaysia.
Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa, Sharaad and Ibrahim here with you with our 1-hour special on Budget 2020. That was Finance Minister Lim Guan Eng talking about some of the initiatives about within the digital economy. Joining us in the studio now to discuss this, we have Jennifer Chang, partner at PwC Taxation Services Malaysia. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what do you think about some of the initiatives announced about the tax, about the digital economy, particularly about the digital tax? So there's going to be a digital tax starting next year. Tell us more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the digital tax was actually announced last year, during last year's budget, and the effective date is 1st of January 2020. Obviously, what's happening around the world is that we are becoming more and more digitized. Yeah? We've got our handphones, we download a lot of things and apps and music and movies. And to a certain extent, the people who are providing all these services are obviously all mostly outside Malaysia. And the question is, government is not getting any taxes from these people that's earning income from Malaysia. So that the question is, how do you actually tax these people? So one way of doing it, obviously, is to come up with an indirect taxes, whether it's GST, VAT, or in our case, service tax, is actually going to be calculated whenever we download something, for example. Obviously, it is the consumer that ultimately bears that tax, and that's what Malaysia is doing. So from January next year onwards, the foreign service provider will have to register with our customs authorities and collect that 6% from us when we download the content.
So you're talking about things like, streaming services like Netflix, Spotify,
Yes.
you buy online games and such. Okay.
Exactly, that's right.
Right. Does this punish the M40 more than any other group in the country? I mean, there were conversations and people were very upset on social media thinking that they're going to be taxed on things that give them pleasure. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Well, I mean, of course, if you compare with currently right now, if we were to download, we don't have this extra 6%. Obviously, it's going to cost a little bit more. But sometimes when you think about it, you're downloading, if it doesn't cost that much, 6% on something that's not very high in value shouldn't be too much as well. And to a certain extent, I think we are not the only country that's doing it. Singapore, in fact, is going to do it January 2020 as well. Australia has done it, New Zealand has done it, a lot of other countries in Europe are also doing it or thinking of doing it. So I would say that it's something that a lot of countries are already considering. Now what's interesting to note, of course, is that the digitization, the whole economy and what's happening around the world is quite interesting, because I just came back from Tokyo where I attended a conference. And I would say that the whole 2 days that was dominated by people talking about digital economy, yeah, and how do you tax it, whether your own company, whether you are getting into the digital side of doing things as well. And interesting to note also is the OECD came up with a paper a few days ago to talk about this. How exactly do countries like Malaysia and others tax this? You know, not just about taxing people like you and me when we download, but when these people are sitting somewhere out there, how do we tax it? Because they don't have an office in Malaysia, but they are actually earning money from Malaysia.
What about the providers that are Malaysian, that are operating within the economy? Will something like this hurt them? Would it, in fact, hurt something that's in its infancy rather than help it grow?
Yeah. I think to a certain extent, currently, for certain types of services, we already have a 6% service tax for certain types of services. So to a certain extent, the digital tax on the foreign service providers is trying to ensure that it's a level playing field, in a sense that if the foreigners provide the services to Malaysians, we will pay 6%. If the locals provide the services, we will also have to pay the 6%. So it's sort of like putting equal footing for both the locals as well as the foreigners. Of course, the question is the local content providers. I mean, currently we don't we have quite a lot of incentives to incentivize the ICT industry as well as the digital economy. I think last budget there's a lot of announcement about that. And of course, this budget as well, a lot of incentives given and emphasis on the digital economy. Funding to provide money for some of these people to come up with innovative ideas. That has also
basically
been
boosting digital
yes,
content.
that's
Okay,
right.
so the idea here is in a 1 hour, 2.5 hours, the finance minister front-loaded his speech with the digital economy conversation. That
Yeah.
was like 20-30 minutes just
Yeah.
on digital economy.
Yeah.
And tying back to what OECD was talking about, countries need to give a greater focus towards digital economy. Is this like in the right step? Are we in tune with the rest of the world, you
Yeah,
think?
I believe so. I believe so. I think we're in tune with the rest of the world. I would say that a lot of countries around the world are also along the same wavelength when it comes to this area. And I think this is a new industry that every country is racing to try and either develop or to be at least in the forefront.
The way I look at it is we're looking in the same direction, but we're not walking towards that direction. Why? Because nothing much came out in terms of tax changes for this particular budget. What's your comment on that?
I would say that it came out already last budget in terms of the digital economy. So the incentives are already there. So now I would say this budget is more about how to support that ecosystem. You know, funding I think is one area. A lot of a lot of all these app producers and all that. Sometimes they could be individuals and smaller companies with an innovative idea, but no funding. So obviously the government has come up with budget allocations, funding to be provided through people like angel investors, through Cradle Fund and all that. Yeah. So I think it's the whole ecosystem that supports that industry.
Well, just to move away slightly from the digital economy, if you don't mind. I mean, we were talking a little bit about the government's move to widen the tax base, right? There was, discussion about inheritance tax, whether that was going to come out. That's clearly not a popular one. Capital gains tax. Now, your opinion, Jennifer, on the fact that these have not been implemented or announced in budget this year. Do you think that was the right move?
Yeah, I think so. To a certain extent, it's sort of expected because the finance minister did announce before the budget that there will be no new taxes.
Correct.
So to a certain extent, I think everybody already sort of expected that there will not be any new taxes. Obviously, there will be very strong reaction if a capital gains tax or inheritance tax had been introduced. So I think to a certain extent, I'm quite agreeable that they weren't introduced. Because when you look around the region as well, in Asia, for example, I would say that with the exception of maybe high tax jurisdiction like Japan and Korea, no other country in Asia has got inheritance tax, for example. So if we had done that, it would make us sort of like stick out as well in a negative way.
But was there enough of a look at reforming the tax system, the tax base in this budget?
Yeah, I would say that tax did not get too much.
Okay,
of
not
an
as much
emphasis.
attention, more incentives,
Yeah,
right?
not so much. For example, I think the previous person that you interviewed, Teresa, also did mention what I felt was perhaps something I was a little bit disappointed with was the fact that you see the race of countries around the world to get foreign investors, FDIs, yeah. And with this trade war between the US and China, you can see that a lot of countries are actually aggressively trying to get some of these companies that are based in China to perhaps set up, a company in their country. And you find that even a country like India with such high taxes have just recently, a few months ago, announced that they're going to cut their tax rate down by 5%. Yeah, Indonesia is going to do that. And countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and all these other countries that used to have higher tax rates than Malaysia they're now lower than us.
Right.
So regionally, we are actually one of the higher ones now. So, okay, we have a lot of incentives for FDIs and all that, but I think with that, the reality is investors will look at it and they will say, okay, is this the place that I want to go to? So I think by not cutting the tax rate, I think we will then have to focus a lot more on specific incentive to specific type of industries as well as investors.
But we've seen how the finance minister has targeted specific industries as you speak of. We're talking about, unicorns, be
Yes.
it existing unicorns or
But also
creating
China,
unicorns.
right?
China
I
and
mean, the
everything.
special
right?
channel for InvestKL to attract investments from China.
Is this a good idea? Do you think that it's going to be growing in terms of investments, following these kind of incentives?
Yep, I believe so. I believe that to a certain extent we need to be a little bit more aggressive in targeting the investors. And sometimes to a certain extent you will find that countries like, for example, Singapore, they're quite aggressive when it comes to targeting investors by going out there, identifying which are the good investors that they want to attract and providing them with very tailor-made type of incentives. And I think by the finance minister talking about it, I think it's a step in the right direction. Malaysia has got a whole host of incentives, but sometimes when you have a long laundry list of incentives, it's very confusing which incentive applies to you.
Right.
So by a more targeted approach, I think it'll be more effective.
Okay, we're going to come back and continue our analysis on what was announced in Budget 2020. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for joining us. That's coming up shortly on Consider This. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.